welcome to all of you in today's case study on a name that immediately draws recognition from all, Ratan Tata. The Tata Group's scion has earned reverence not only as a successful industrialist, but as a great human being and philanthropist. The Tatas are indeed a family that built a business and a nation. I now hand over to Dr. Chopra, who will now deep dive into the philanthropic history of the Tatas.
Thank you so much, Ashna. Tata Trusts and the nation trusts Tata. Tata Trust is the philanthropic arm of Tata Sons, the group holding company. Coming to Ratan Tata, he is a supporter of education, medicine, and rural development. He's a leading philanthropist, and more than 65% of his personal shares are invested in charitable trusts. Since 2000, of Tata Trusts, having left the responsibility of running the group or the conglomerate Tata Sons for others to run, and that owns that arm also, the business arm also owns the 66% of group holding company Tata Sons. So Tata Trust has more than 65% shares of Ratan Tata, and also 66% of the group holding company Tata Sons. Next, please. Where did it all start? It all started with the patriarch of Indian industry, Jamshedji Tata, the grand old man of Tata Sons. He has been a pioneer and the most philanthropic person in past 100 years, with his total donations being worth about 102 billion US dollars based on current value. Say, not only one recent study, but actually many international studies. The guiding principle for progress as designed by Jamshedji was very different from what was prevalent at his time. Firstly, there was no structured philanthropy at that time. His first endowment trust was the first structured uplifting and helping the nation and the community to grow. The guiding principle was what advances a nation or a community is not so much to prop up its weakest and the most helpless member, but to lift up the best and the most gifted so as to make them one of the greatest service to the country. Also, I'm not going to repeat it again and again. All the endowments and the charitable and philanthropic work any of the Tatas do is irrespective of caste, creed, or religion. Thank you. Next slide, please. Jamshed N. Tata established the J.N. Tata Endowment Trust in 1892, possibly the first of its kind in the world. This allowed any brilliant Indian student to apply and pursue higher education abroad. Generally, it chose to be England in those days, and later came to be popularly known as the Tata Scholarships. By 1924, 2 out of 5 successful candidates who went into Indian civil service were Tata scholars. When he passed on, in his will, he earmarked rupees 30 lakhs of that time of his personal wealth into creating an Indian Institute of Science, which his sons Ratanji and Dorabji Tata brought to life in 1911. Not only that, he prepared a complete blueprint how he wanted that money and that institute to be like. Next, please. Sir Dorabji Tata Trust. Sir Dorabji was the elder son of Jamshedji. He put all his wealth into this trust, which was to be used for advancement of learning and research, the relief of distress, and other charitable purposes. He helped, along with his brother, establish his father's dream institute, the Indian Institute of Science at Bangalore in 1911, which has nurtured many bright minds into research and wellness of India and progress of society. He started the Indian Olympic movements More than 100 years ago, in 1909, he was the first one who facilitated 4 athletes and 2 wrestlers to participate in the Antwerp Games. That's the first time any Indian had participated in Olympics. He constituted a chair for Sanskrit studies at the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Pune. As a president of Indian Olympic Association, he financed a full Indian contingent in year 1924 Paris Olympiad. Next, please. Sir Ratan Tata, the younger Tata brother, he established a trust called Sir Ratan Tata Trust. This came into being in 1919 with a sum of rupees 8 million value of that time. It's one of the oldest grant bestowing foundations in India. This foundation is instrumental in developing processes, providing grants to institutions in areas of rural livelihood and communities, education, health, enhancing civil society and governance, and arts, craft, and culture. Wow, what a spectrum. It provides grants and partners with organizations that engage in innovative and sustainable initiatives and with potential to make a visible difference. It also provides grants for endowments. It has a separate program for small grants and gives grants to individuals for education and medical relief. Next, please. This is a trust which was established in memory of Lady Tata by her husband, Sir Dorabji Tata, in April 32. Lady Tata passed on with leukemia at a young age of 50, and it has 2 sort of parts to it: international awards and Indian awards, and scholarships and endowments. It all is sort of directed at research and education in field of leukemia, that is simply known as blood cancer, and other diseases related to blood. Thank you so much. Next, please. Now comes the grand old man, J.R.D. Tata. He was the trustee of Sir Dorabji Tata Trust from its inception in 1932. J.R.D. Tata joined the Tata Group as an apprentice on the floor in Tisco at a young age of 25, and became a part of the philanthropic movement of Tatas. He established the Tata Memorial Hospital at Mumbai in 1941, the first cancer hospital in Asia. He established Tata Institute of Social Sciences, 1936, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, 1945, National Center for Performing Arts in later years. Due to having started his journey from the floor shop as an apprentice, he was deeply concerned about the worker and the family. So in 1956, he initiated in Tisco to give workers a stronger voice in affairs of the company. It included a lot of things like, 8 hours mandatory working hours, medical relief, and so on. Later, these guidelines were adopted as statutory requirements or labor laws in India. Thank you. Next. It is a heritage of progress. This it's a graphic representation of how down the line, the generation after generation, the Tatas have worked towards upliftment of community and country. And now the mantle is held by Ratan Tata, the present head of Tata Trusts. Next, please. Tata Trust as a great, because of the contribution by the Tata sons and by personal wealth of the creators, as I have explained down the line. It amalgamates all the trust held by Tatas and started by Tatas, Sir Jamshedji Tata onwards. It has a total revenue of, as per 2021, a total revenue of 1,002 billion approximately. And the money is directed towards these sustainable development goals. These are the same, or SDGs I would call it, the same SDGs which are followed by UNESCO. These are 17 in number. I'll just quickly enumerate them. Number 1, no poverty. Number 2, zero hunger. Number 3, good health and wellness. Number 4, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry promotion and infrastructure, reduced inequality, sustainable cities and climates, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life of land, peace, justice, and strong institution partnership for the goals. Also affects other 3 or 4 goals, like no poverty means zero hunger, good health, good education, etc., etc. Next, please. Same goals in a smaller frame, in a more compact form, are also being, our focus areas for various social and humanitarian organizations, including the Rotary International, which has 7 focal areas, which encompasses all these 17 SDGs. Now, apart from this huge charitable organization, what Ratan Tata has done in the prominent things that he has done during his leadership of Tata Trust, he donated 15,000 crores to fight COVID. He endowed IIT Mumbai with a sum of rupees 750 million to form the Tata Center of Technology and Design. And this is the largest donation ever received by IIT Mumbai in its history. Granted rupees 950 million to Indian Institute of Science to study causes and possible treatment of Alzheimer's. After 2611, not only he looked after his own employees, but also compensated employees of railway, police, market vendors, including pedestrians whose lives were affected because of it. Next, please. Next slide, please. He endowed $70 million to Tata Scholarship Fund to Cornell University, $50 million to Harvard Business School for an executive education center named Tata Hall, and the largest ever sum of $35 million by a company to Carnegie Mellon University for a facility for research in cognitive and automated vehicles, gifted $70 million for University of California in area of combating malaria by genetic modifications. Last but not the least, for so many Rotarians and connected people here, Ratan Tata is an ACAS member, the Rotary Foundation's highest tier of donors. He did it in 2016-17 through Rotary Club of Mumbai. Thank you so much. If I've taken more time than was allotted to me, I truly apologize for it. Over to Ashna, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chopra, for running us through the various philanthropic activities that are being undertaken by the Tata Group and by Ratan Tata himself. Moving on now to the Tata Group. Leadership with trust is their motto. This is what they actually go by. They write it down and they follow it in spirit. Well, Tata Group operates in more than 100 countries across 6 continents. It comprises of 30 companies across 10 verticals, 29 publicly listed Tata enterprises with a combined market capitalization of $314 billion. Market capitalization is basically the current market value of each share into the total number of shares. Tata Group collectively employs over 8 lakh people. Basically, they provide the source of livelihood for such a great amount of people. In 2021 alone, the revenue of Tata companies taken together was 7.8 trillion INR. Mission. Now on the screen before us is the mission of the Tata Group, which goes by to improve the quality of life of the communities that we serve globally through long-term stakeholder value creation based on leadership with trust. This imbibes the outlook of the founders and the leadership of the Tata Group, and most importantly, of Ratan Tata himself. Well, each Tata company or enterprise operates independently under the guidance and supervision of its own board of directors. Tata Sons is the principal investment holding company and promoter of Tata companies. And as Savitaji already discussed, 60% of the equity share capital of Tata Sons is held by philanthropic trusts, which support education, health, livelihood, art, and culture. This means that the ultimate beneficiary, well, we could say a major beneficiary of all the activities of the Tata Group, is the society itself. Ratan Tata. He was the chairman of Tata Sons, the holding company of the Tata Group from 1991 till his retirement on December 28, 2012. Effective December 29, 2012, Ratan Tata has been conferred the honorary title of Chairman Emeritus of Tata Sons, Tata Industries, Tata Motors, Tata Steel, and Tata Chemicals. Well, now we go on and analyze few of the acquisitions taken by, basically undertaken by the Tata Group over the years and how they eventually turned out to be and how Ratan Tata played a very important role in where they are today. We start with the first one, which talks about the acquisition of Tetley Tea. Well, around the late 1990s, Tatas had huge gardens where they could grow teas, but they felt that they did not have a brand where they could really go and market themselves with. So all that basically led to the acquisition of the Tetley Tea business in the year 2000. It was a first of its kind. It was a first of its kind deal because Tata's had acquired Tetley, which was nearly 3 to 4 times its net worth. With this, it was the largest global acquisition ever made by an Indian group, largest global acquisition, and basically an international brand acquired by an Indian company. And when this was done, Ratan Tata himself said that he wants now the other Indian in basically corporates, conglomerates to go ahead and imbibe the spirit and go global. It was indeed followed also in principle. HUL went out to acquire certain companies abroad. And had Tata not done this acquisition, Tata would have already been at a loss. So basically, Tata set the trend for global acquisition and for making an Indian company go global. However, the acquisition was not as pleasant as Tata's had anticipated. Major reasons for that were firstly, a leveraged buyout structure. A leveraged buyout structure means that the debt component is very high compared to the equity component. Secondly, cultural differences. Now, this was an acquisition of a British company. And at that point of time, there was an issue of whether the British employees, would answer to Indian managers or would be willing to work with the Indian managers. And lastly, the lack of planning. The acquisition, though, was well thought out initially because they wanted to build a brand, but again, not a lot of detailed planning was gone into the acquisition of Tetley Tea. However, Ratan Tata's vision of Tata Tea as a global beverage company has now been realized over the years. This has largely been possible through integration of processes at both the companies, maintaining operational independence, and exploring synergies without any time pressure, which led to all this turnaround of the Tetley Tea. Tata Consumer Products has now become the most globalized company in the Tata Group, with 70% of its revenues coming from international operations and more people around the world drinking Tata tea than using Tata vehicles, Tata Steel, or even TCS software. So, to conclude, though the acquisition of Tetley Tea was not a rosy process, but through proper identification and analysis, Tata's ensured that its investment was not wasted. This acquisition was indeed a bold move by the Tatas. Next, we go on to the acquisition of Chorus. Tata bought Chorus for an eye-watering 13.1 billion US dollars in 2007 after winning a dramatic head-to-head bidding against a Brazilian rival. So it instantly got Tata into the ranks of the top 10 steel makers in the world. Ratan Tata himself described it as a defining moment for the company. and justified the price that they paid for it because he said that it gave them immediate access to the European markets, which initially otherwise would have been a very, very difficult task. However, on announcement of the tea, the Tata Steel stock took a beating, given the high level of debt that the company would have to take to finance it. To which Ratan Tata said, "Quite frankly, I do feel it is both taking a short-term and harsh view." He said, "In future, somebody will look back and say that we did the right thing." Unfortunately, Tata Steel's European foray soon it proved problematic. It was expensive, it coincided with the commodities boom, and the major factor, it was compounded by China's dumping cheaper steel in Europe. So basically, I think the major reason that ultimately the acquisition didn't work out was because China was dumping cheaper steel in Europe. Chorus added about $6 billion of debt and cost Tata Steel its financial health and leadership in the home market. 12 years after it made the ambitious acquisition, the company acknowledged it bet on the wrong market at the wrong time. However, in 2018, with the finalization of a JV, the painful chapter in Tata Steel history came to an end. And recently, thanks to a big surge in its margins and net profit in the second quarter, Tata Steel has overtaken TCS to become the most profitable company in the Tata Group. To conclude, Chorus was indeed an aspirational mistake despite its recent success and profitability. The third and the last acquisition that we discussed here is the acquisition of the JLR. In 2008, Tata Motors acquired JLR from Ford Motors in an all-cash transaction. Soon after the deal, Tata Motors found itself loaded with debt and shortly posted its first loss in 7 years. This is due largely to the large costs, basically, that were large running costs. Naturally, the stocks crashed. Ratan Tata, who was then directly involved in the business at the time, he traveled across the US, meeting dealers, and he responded to the market needs immediately. He took it upon himself to take up the baton and basically do something so that they can turn around this acquisition. By 2013, the strategy to invest in new products started to pay off. JLR almost tripled its sales in 2017 from 2009, with revenues topping $34 billion US. The acquisition has been a great success, and currently JLR contributes close to 80% of the Tata Motors revenues. So how did Tata really make JLR profitable? The key goals here were cash management, checking costs, and divesting stakes in group companies so that they can pump all that cash into the Tata Motors. With this, I end the financial part of it and the acquisitions, and I hand over to Sanjeevji to talk about Ratan Tata, his character, his leadership style. Over to you, Sanjeevji.
Thank you, Ashna. Thank you, Ashna. And moving on to the 5 leadership lessons from Ratan Tata. Can we move to the next slide, please? That he was a visionary is beyond question. When he joined the group, it was barely doing any business outside India, as Ashna pointed out. Even though many opposed him, he maintained that the company had to go global. Today, half of Tata's revenues come from overseas. Under his leadership, Tata acquired brands like Tetley, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Taj Boston. He was humble. He started out working as a blue-collar employee for Tata Steel. He personally visited the families of the 80 employees who were affected because of the 26/11 attacks. He remembers almost everyone by their first names and is not dismissive. He's a decision maker. A famous quote of his: "I don't believe in making the right decisions. I take decisions and then make them right." Of course, subsequently, he has distanced himself from this particular statement, saying Facebook has loaded that in that much terminology. He's very inspiring. Tata does well because its employees and management adhere to its values. Ratan Tata has made sure that the huge conglomerate sticks to the Tata values. The mission of the company is to improve the lives of the communities we serve globally. We all know, friends, anyone who joins the Tatas, whether as a blue or a white-collared executive, stays with them. They are in for the marathon innings. Hardly any person joining Tata leaves in a hurry in a short sprint to look for greener pastures outside. We all know that they stay for long. I'm sure Sukesh will have a lot to say for it, being an ex-Tata employee with Voltas himself. Risk takers, he has made big moves like launching the Tata Nano and acquiring the second largest steel maker in Europe, that was Chorus Steel. Ashna, can we move to the next slide, please? Tata is one of the most employee-friendly companies in India, and no doubt about that, because Ratan Tata believes in the policy of being answerable to the employees as well. He shares that as a business leader, you have to face your shareholders. And then there are the people who work, who have to deliver the goods and work for you. You need to be there for them as well. His commitment to work is well known. He had written a white paper on the future of the Tata Group about 25, 30 years ago, when his mother was undergoing cancer treatment. The white paper already focused then on sectors like communication, telecom, and renewable energy, making him a visionary, as mentioned before. Can we move to the next slide, please? The real Ratan of India, responsible, authentic, and integral, integrating inner values and outer actions leader. Next slide. Solutions to problems require creativity. That's the Tata style. Once at Tata Steel, the chief executive officer received a complaint from the workers, the blue-collared workers, that the toilets there were not up to standard. And they requested that the toilets be made at least at par, at least reasonable, if not at par with the white-collared ones. On the general manager being called in and asked to do the needful, he protested, saying the whole process would take a month. And then besides that, there'll be a lot of inconvenience and expenditure, etc. And that the employees are not really used to those conditions at their own homes, what they're demanding here. Well, the CEO made a very simple solution. He switched the boards outside the two toilets. For the executives, suddenly they had to move to the regular ones where the blue level workers were working. And those employees, those workers from the floor level were given the toilets that the executives were using. And you know what happened? In 24 hours, the magic happened. All that 1 month went out of the window. In 24 hours, the toilets were refurbished like never before. And all toilets were brought to par. That's the Tata way of doing things, giving equality to all. Next slide, please. Look at the humility of the man. He knows that there's a campaign to try and get him the Bharat Ratna awarded, because we believe the government sleeps and is not proactive. It needs to be woken up time and again to give deserving candidates the Bharat Ratna. But unfortunately, he has been humble and he says, don't push my case. I don't want the signature campaign to continue. His humility came to the fore. Next slide, Ashna. Now here we'll take a pause, friends. This picture was in the news just last week. The Prime Minister flew down to Assam, and in Guwahati, Tatas have committed to open up 15 cancer hospitals across the Northeast region, like they've done at Bombay. And he says the last years of my life will be dedicated to health. Friends, we have had the strengths mentioned. We have had the vision of Ratan Tata mentioned. We have had the positives mentioned. There are some perceived weaknesses in the man as well. I say perceived because these are individually analyzed based on your own intelligence and perception. There's an accusation of autocratic tendency in him. When we say autocratic tendency, it means his decision not to allow any upturning of whatever he has decided as the chairman earlier. We've seen that happen. When Chorus Steel was being taken over, the CEO, Muthuswamy, objected to the high cost for Chorus Steel, but Muthuswamy was subdued by the Tata influence. When the JLR deal was struck, as Ashna mentioned, she didn't say mouth-watering, it was eye-watering. It was that heavy an expenditure, which sank them deep into the throes of what should I say, really a very costly purchase. And the moment we had his successor, Cyrus Mistry, none other than the chairman and CEO of Tata Sons at the time, trying to distance himself and overturn this costly purchase, he was eased out. So in all fairness, we seem to understand that where Ratan's views were challenged, he was perhaps not as patient as one would visualize him to be. Loss-making investments is another perception. We say that barring Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, which is the mother hen, which funds a lot of the investments into other Tata companies. When you look at Tata Chemicals, you see a huge investment made from Tata TCS. Look at Tata Power, look at any of the Tata concerns, the mother hen, the single mother hen was always TCS. But lately, very lately, in fact, we had a turnaround from Tata Steel because of the global prices. But so it has been one single huge profit-making company that's taken care of the Tata investments and performances across the board. There's talk of conservative approach to changes. Tata's, in fact, many say he's most un-American in his approach to profit-making. As a corporate, profit-making should be a key factor. While it's all great to say that you must have, rather than going for strategy, you see, the important thing here is that you need to develop culture, and Tata culture is taking care of its employees and staff in the long run. But many accuse that at the cost of profitability. So Tatas are very slow to change and spot market opportunities. And when they move like an elephant, way too late when others have been the early birds. There's also accusation of the bureaucratic scandal. Honestly, I only know of one, which was this Radia tapes, where they said that even Ratan Tata and the House of Tatas worked alongside the Reliance group of Ambani Standard, and nothing was out of their range to get the business. These are simply perceived weaknesses. It's our job to tell you the strengths and the perceived weaknesses. Else we would not be making a justified and fair presentation on Ratan Tata. Can we move to the next slide, please, Ashna? Friends, this would be the last slide of the presentation. This is the judgmental slide. Each of us has his or her own perceptions on Ratan. Don't forget, it's not the House of Tatas that is the subject matter today, but Ratan Tata. I saw on the chat box a comment that yes, JRD was the first man to fly Air India, but then today's topic technically is Ratan Tata. We also saw that in 1932, he flew from Karachi to Bombay and carried the letters. That was the first flight into India, but that was on JRD. Here I ask you all to judge for yourselves. This is the scale. And you can see that the three of us, that is Dr. Savita, Ashna, and yours truly, have honestly felt that the positives far outweigh the negatives in the man. We have gone to the extent of not mentioning, we didn't want to influence, but we have felt 80% positive and 20% negative on the man. Being a human being, it's to be honest, I leave it to you all, not I, we leave it to you all to judge for yourselves where Ratan Tata stands in your perception based on our presentation. We apologize if we have committed some errors.